when these three things come together, awesome technology possibilities, the science fiction becoming real, right? Like the first part of that puzzle. The second one, of course, huge impact on value capture and human behavior. Some new things can be done. And then third part is market economics. And so if the three things kind of come together, I think that's when we start seeing real disruption.
Welcome to another amazing episode of the Tech Business Roundtable podcast, brought to you by Equa.tech, the leader in digital marketing for tech companies. We want to first take a moment to thank you for sharing this podcast with your friends and on social media and helping us grow week after week. Meet our host of today's TBR episode, Ryan Davies. Ryan is the Director of Marketing of Equa.tech and is a dynamic leader in driving business transformation through technology. Over to you, Ryan.
Welcome, everyone, to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. This is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech innovators, entrepreneurs, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements they've established. I'm your host, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's discussion, Bold Innovation, Building Disruptive Tech Companies, with Shashank Tiwari. Shashank, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I've heard your podcasts and other episodes, Ryan, and they're wonderful. So I'm really glad to be part of this journey. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. You know what? This is definitely the honor is all ours here. I think when we're talking about our audience and having people on that are just great key opinion leaders, thought leaders, and people who have, done the trail before. And, sometimes it's blazed the trail. Sometimes it's been, kind of burned the trail a little bit. It's a little of both, right? To be able to get through it. But I think, Shashank, you're fantastic for having us here. A little bit of a background. Shashank is passionate about building highly disruptive tech companies and products that are simple, bold, again, break the mold, break the path, and believes in the possibilities and thrives on what individuals can do here. Company building is ingrained in his DNA and has been part of many exciting journeys in the past. StackRox, Medallia, Elementum, from algorithmic systems on Wall Street to building Silicon Valley startups. So again, somebody who has absolutely run the gauntlet, if you will, over the past couple of decades and has had excellent runs. Everything as an engineer, a product leader, again, a CEO, a founder, helping with scalability, managing high performance teams, and really spans a really wide variety from cybersecurity to AI and mathematics and investment analysis, marketing, accounting. This is Shashank's our guy. This is the guy that's going to be able to answer a lot of questions for us and provide a lot of insight for our audience. So with that, color up the background a bit more, introduce yourself a little more from beyond my introduction there, and a little bit about your background in the tech industry.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, again, thank you for the kind words. I think the way I like to tell my story really is I've just been on multiple exciting, interesting journeys, right? Like it's all about that. I think company building, bold innovations, even just sort of having good success and also scars, along the way are all just part of the journeys, right? So as you go through many journeys and you take on adventures, these things happen to everyone, and they have happened to me too. My sort of adventure started typically like most, folks who are deep in sort of technology and, trying to figure out what technology can do for us, really was the starting point for me. And, this happened almost a couple of decades ago, just about the time when the internet was, coming together as a more meaningful, piece, as a more meaningful infrastructure beyond just, the hype and the initial euphoria we all had, right, with the emergence of that in, late 90s. And then so I was kind of in that era, sort of just getting started with my career. And because there was so much happening in technology, just so much innovation, so many new things just occurring every single day, it got me excited, right? And so my mission became, well, I got to go and learn these things and got to figure out where this can take us. And that's what led me down the path, right? And then, of course, as you mentioned, I think that has transitioned into a lot of very interesting category-defining companies. Many of them weren't really category-defining companies when I became part of those companies, because those were ideas, those were very interesting mission statements out there that teams kind of rallied behind and made it happen. So I think that's what kind of reinforced in me over and over again the concept of building, taking on bold ideas, taking on these adventurous things that sometimes look impossible, sometimes look very difficult to accomplish in finite amounts of time with limited resources that most startups and early stage companies have. But each of these journeys really came through not only with success but also with a ton of learnings, right? And so that's what kind of got me excited even more so every time I jumped onto the next journey, the next leg and the next leg, right? And here I am sort of 2 decades fast forward building something at the intersection of AI and cyber, which is yet another bold play in that area. And I must mention that is that if you think about company building at large, from when I started a couple of decades back to where we are today, I think it has become only more incredibly exciting today. And the reasons for that is there is so much more tech innovation that has occurred in the last 2 decades. It's just unbelievable, the pace and the momentum we have around many of these technologies, and they range across board, right, from multiple different spectrums, from AI on one side, which I'm very close to Web3 kind of stuff on the other, to the fintech revolution going on, to the infrastructure being rethought, to even the consumer behavior kind of transitioning with mobile, and then now sort of the post mobile era, if you may. And then also, of course, even software delivery, packaging, and how we build things, everything has transitioned, right? And then beyond software, there's also a ton of innovation going on in very core tech areas, space, sort of renewables, just food, health tech, genomics. There's just like, think about an area of technology, and there's something that I think looked like science fiction 2 decades ago. It's becoming
Yeah.
more real today, right? So there's plenty happening there. And I do feel like this is the moment, this is the opportunity for not only folks like me who are deep in this, I live and breathe this, but also for just about everybody else to start getting deeper and deeper into this, tech innovation and company building puzzle, because, that's where a lot of the next generation of exciting journeys will be charted. So that's how I kind of
It,
think about this.
yeah, it's really, I mean, it's so expansive. And I mean, that's part of what we do here, right? We pillar a lot of this and we talk about it. And it's just, when I remember when we started ideating about the podcast show and the roundtable and everything else, and it was like, well, how many categories can we divide this into? And all of a sudden, it was like there's like 60 on this list of just areas that have tech based alone that touch, like you said, retail to med tech to education to government to it just didn't matter. Like it's so expansive and it's so crazy how quickly it's growing. And we had a lot of family time recently, and we sat around a table and of course we were talking about the podcast a little bit. I was telling people about different episodes and guests and things to come and all of this, and we were talking about this same idea of we had people at the table who were in their 90s, and they're like, well, do you understand where it was when I was a kid, for their great grandkids who were in the room, and what that curve looked like. And then even for the grandparents and what 60 years. And then for me, what 40 years has looked like. And even for, the kids that are like, well, 5 years ago, this didn't exist. And now we can do this now. It's like, it is this rapidly changing landscape. And I think why this is such a great discussion is talking about disruption, right? Because that's really what brings change, is when you recognize how to disrupt the industry, bring something new to the forefront, and change the way people traditionally do things or didn't know it could be done, and take advantage of what's out there and upscale it into something that's, again, building a company around that. So give me your definition of disruption in the tech industry, and really, like, how does someone embody that concept of disruptive technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think in my worldview, if you start thinking about disruption per se, firstly, it's very much sort of thought of in the single dimension. At least the industry likes to put it primarily as, as just a tech innovation, in the sense that something that we haven't seen before, something that we couldn't conceive before, has now become true and possible. But I think, like, if you start looking at more realistically what disruption means, and this is something that I have lived through multiple, companies and now multiple decades, is that it's really a mixture of three different vectors, or three different sort of things coming together, and that's what leads to really disruption. Because if you really think about it and parse that, what exactly is disruption? Well, disruption is one, new things becoming possible that weren't possible yesterday, right? Like in the past we couldn't do it, and now we can do it. So for example, you could say, like, once as a society we were able to do space travel and landed on the moon. Well, that was definitely a new technology, or a new thing that we unearthed that we hadn't done before having done that the very first time. And so therefore now we've created the possibilities with the new technology. And similar stuff is now happening with across board, from AI to mobile to web3 to cloud to infra to what have you, right? Like there's so many different pieces that we are able to do today that we could not do yesterday. But having said that, there's a second piece, or the second vector, that becomes equally important with disruption, is that there is something useful from a humankind standpoint that can be accomplished with this new technology, right? So you could have a technology that was not possible yesterday that you can do today, but if it is of no way that we as humans, we as society can relate to or take advantage of, then I think it becomes a nice novel idea, which also kind of dies its death as soon as it becomes possible, because nobody sees an interest in pursuing it or doing anything with it. But if it creates certain behavioral changes or new possibilities in terms of how we could capture value out of it, or do things with it, then I think that's where the disruption really starts becoming possible. And a classic example of that is the internet. I mean, prior to that, communication, if you just look at communication as as one of the forms that was really, really disrupted with internet, was very slow, right? We did over letters and, at best, phone calls, synchronous phone calls, right? Like that's what our forms of communications were, apart from, of course, meeting people in person. But with the internet, that communication disruption has just accelerated to a point where today we can do things like this, right? You and I are sitting far away in different places and we can record video online,
Yeah.
right? So this was not possible, 2 3 decades back, and seemed like science fiction. And today this is most people's everyday life,
Yeah.
right? Like that's how they exist, like that's how they work, that's how they communicate. So I think that is disruption, right, in terms of new value that can be captured by humans, and new things that become possible. And then the third vector, and the equally important vector, I think, is that there needs to be a certain level of market economics and possibilities around it. And why I think that is also important is because, at the lab level or the academic level, there are many ideas that get built out because that's their job. Most of the time, the research labs have as a part of their mission very explicitly stated to go look for new things. So they are very actively trying to conduct experiments and create new things. But 9 out of 10 things that get created in that kind of fashion actually never see the light of the day, because there is no tangible, substantial commercial ramification or market economics around that stuff that gets built out. So for example, somebody builds out a very fancy automobile, but that does a lot of different things, uses new kind of fuel, goes at maybe 10x the speed that one could think of, does a few other fancy things, but then it also costs the moon. It's not something that anybody can reasonably manufacture at a reasonable cost in a reasonable time, and then nobody
Mhm.
can even buy it, or there are probably only like 3 buyers on the planet. Well, there is no market economics around it, and so therefore that kind of an innovation kind of fizzles off, right? Because nobody's incentivized, nobody's excited enough to go pursue it. So I feel like when these three things come together, awesome technology possibilities, the science fiction becoming real, right? Like the first part of that puzzle. The second one, of course, huge impact on value capture and human behavior. Some new things can be done, and then third part is market economics. And so if the three things kind of come together, I think that's when we start seeing real disruption. And this has been my learning as well with company building, because sometimes when we start building companies in deep tech, we have maybe just one axis of these three important axes. We may be very enamored, very enthused about this new technology because as scientists, as engineers, as mathematicians, as doctors, as whoever, researchers of any form,
Mhm.
we are very excited about the possibility. The science fiction becoming real is what takes over our consciousness, and we feel like, oh, this is really cool, and I want to make it happen. But then sometimes the other two vectors don't align with it, and so therefore you don't have meaningful adoption, and therefore no meaningful disruption. It just becomes like an interesting experiment that fizzles off quickly. But if the other two come through, and that's when you start seeing sort of industries being born. That's where you start seeing the goodness of online video calls, cloud computing, the new generation of AI, um, the emergence of technologies that are now revolutionizing fintech to martech to consumer choices to what have you, right? So I think that's the way kind of I parse and think about disruption at large.
I think it's. I mean, what an incredible overview there to be able to divide it, like you said, like just kind of compartmentalize into what how to define it and sort of what it means from that perspective. The key principles, I guess, or values that define disruption, right? So, I mean, with all of that, I guess you know. The approach behind it, I know your approach with Uno.ai and with other things that you've done before has been around, you know, be bold, but be simplistic, right? Don't you, that's a very key element to that success in terms of being disruptive doesn't mean revolutionizing every aspect. It means being simplistic and defined in your approach for that. Maybe speak to us a little bit about that philosophy as well, about that how to be both of those things, because that's quite a line to walk. But I think when that's what you've sort of mastered at this stage, like you said, over 2 decades of being able to rein in the expectations, but still be enough to challenge the status quo and really accomplish something.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent question, and something that I have kind of slowly learned, I would say, over these 2 decades of experience. Um, and I'm still learning. I don't think that you can master that, so to speak. It's a journey again. Something that you sort of keep sharpening and keep sharpening until it gets to a point where you're able to at least avoid some of the mistakes you've done in the past and maybe make some new mistakes, right? So the way to think about this is anything that needs again value capture, the second axis, if you may, out of my three that I was talking about from a bold disruption standpoint, needs to be approachable, needs to be easy to manage, needs to be easy to understand, right? So if somebody, whatever that thing is, let's say a video call that we are engaging in, let's just take this as an example.
Mm-hmm.
If I needed to read a 5-page manual, forget even a 50-page one, but 5-page manual, and I had to go through a little training before I could use this new technology that is available for us to take advantage of, there's a good chance I might be reluctant to actually do it. As humans, we are generally lazy, right? Like and also we are hesitant to change our behavior and habits because
Mm-hmm.
for some reason they work. The status quo works, which is why status quo and changing status quo is so hard for just about anything, right? And so if the friction is higher, if there is complexity in adopting anything or interacting with anything, what you're really doing is you're not allowing or giving that particular interesting innovation or interesting piece that you build a chance to even be out there in the wild. Forget it being succeeding or failing. Success and failure is still further down the line, but you're even not enabling it enough to have meaningful experimentation around it, right? You're sort of deliberately making it difficult so that less and less people would want to even sign up to go and even give it a try, right? So I think like that's the very first piece of the puzzle of keeping things abstractions and keeping things from a user standpoint as simple as possible. Now, doing that is extremely hard. It's important and it's interesting, and yes, it can be theoretically discussed, but doing that is where I think the biggest challenge comes in, because most of these innovations, by design, right, by their very sort of DNA, the way they are built, are complex. They're just many moving parts of their puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like think about again, space travel or modern vehicle or even technology that is enabling us to do business on a daily basis. There is a lot that goes on behind the scenes. There are multiple pieces of this puzzle. There are multiple points of failure within those pieces of the puzzle. There's a lot of interdependency. There's a lot of complexity in terms of availability of different layers of resources that need to kind of come together and come together in the right way and the right time. So there is a lot of entropy. There is a lot of complexity in these complex systems, right? In these bold sort of innovative systems. But the fact is that it needs sort of a simpler abstraction on top of it for it to become widely adopted and for it to have a chance to go out there and succeed and really kind of allow humans and allow people to capture the value out of it. um, and the classic examples of this would be again online commerce. There's so much goes on behind the scenes, but the shopper doesn't need to even worry about it or doesn't even need to care about it. All they do is, hey, I go look through catalogs or search through it and click a button here and click a button there, and I'm able to buy that and it gets delivered to my house. And so it has been simplified in terms of usability. It has been simplified in terms of expectation. It has been simplified in terms of expected, sort of behavior or different paths that that interaction could take. And that simplicity is what is allowing people to go and really double down on it and trust it, and do more with it. Whereas behind the scenes, there's so much going on. There's the complexity of the online commerce systems. There's the a very complex sort of inventory management and warehousing and cataloging and search and what have you, sort of going on behind the scenes. Then there's a complex logistics that really finally gets that thing procured on one side and then delivered on the other side. So there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, but again, for the user, they're blind to it. And in fact, I would argue that 9 out of 10 people probably don't even know about it and don't care to know about it. And so I think like that's where the disruption elements being successful has to have an element of simplicity, as a very key tenet, as a very important piece of the puzzle. If you make it complex, you just sort of killing your own beautiful idea.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I think I come in from, and I've seen this happen over the last 2 decades, as I mentioned, with my own sort of different interesting. More enterprise focused companies, but certainly have seen this technology evolve over a period of time, and they have been category defining companies, um, where the simplicity is what allowed those innovations to succeed. And that's what really clicked with the end user in these cases, the sort of business users or enterprise users, B2B users. But it was easier, and in fact in most of the times it was actually easier and simpler than status quo, right? They had to do like 7 steps to accomplish a certain task, and with this new innovation, which was bolder, which was taking on unlocking newer possibilities, was actually involving 5 or sometimes involving even 2, right? And so not only that it was simple, it was actually simpler than the status quo. So now if you do apples to apples comparison, you're looking at a new technology that is allowing you to do 5 new things with 3 lesser steps. Think of it that way. So,
Yeah.
and that's where the magic happens. I think that's where your product really starts getting the right feedback loop. And of course, if your product is something that solves a key problem that the world is struggling with, then you've got success out there, right? Like you've got good companies in the making.
I think it's absolutely a perfect product development philosophy and how to look at things, and again building that simplicity into it, where simple is maybe oversimplifying it, right, from a term perspective, because like you said, it's so incredibly complex, but it needs to portray simplicity, right? And you mentioned in there the prioritization of like user centric design as part of that product development process, right? So when it comes to that, again, you've traveled this road before many times. How do you get that that feedback, that create that user centric design process? Is it a lot of just sort of starting with a personal and small scale testing? Is there a feedback loop that you use and build that in to help with that simplicity and standard? And I know, again, for a lot of our listeners, they may be at an MVP stage approach right now where you really want to test that simplicity and that step and then continuously upscale it. So maybe, tell us a little bit about that from that user centric side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a very good point about, in fact, you bring up 2 ideas that I want to dig a little deeper into. One is the idea of experimentation, and the other one is, user-centric design and user feedback. Um, I'm actually one of those folks which believes in the school of ruthless prioritization, not just prioritization, but ruthless prioritization. Um, and the reason I say that is, when you start a company, especially if you're an early stage company, um, the odds in every certain dimension is against you. You have less people, you have less time, you have less money, you have less of your history and credibility, and in terms of the new company that you're building. And so, essentially, you've got to make the most out of the limited resources and the limited, sort of things that you can really affect, things that you can take advantage of. So in that worldview, where you have scarce resources and you want maximum output, maximum leverage out of those scarce resources, the one philosophy that has worked beautifully for me, and I've become a huge believer of that, and that's how we did it even in the most recent company, the latest one that I'm 24/7 on, Uno.ai, is go speak to the users first. So usually the process is most companies, most founders, most even I would say execs in companies that are expanding onto new product lines, um, first try to come up with an idea, and then they would conceive the idea and build a prototype, and then they would go talk to the users and say, hey, here's the prototype, here's what we are trying to do, what do you think, right? The problem with that approach is that you have gone with a solution first approach, and so therefore you've already colored the canvas, if you may, right? And so if I were to kind of stretch that analogy a little bit more, that metaphor, if you already put blue paint on your canvas, there are only so many different colors that are going to go with it, right? And you're not allowing the freedom, the creativity of beautiful art to be developed out of it, and you've constrained yourself, right? So that's where I think the most of the problem starts. On the contrary, if you really went with the intention of exploration, like, I'm going to go learn, and this is what we did, by the way, with Uno AI. We have a fantastic solution, and we were one of the first few who thought of the cybersecurity copilot, which has become widely popular. And this was back in 2021, a year before all this chat GPT and other stuff that became commonplace, right? So it was not in common lingo. People weren't talking about copilot. But what I must confess, and what I want to share here so that other people also see this, is we didn't think of it in some, we didn't lock ourselves in the room for 3 days and brainstormed and came out thinking, aha, we've got this cybersecurity copilot, this is what we got to build. It didn't happen like that, right? Like, not at all. In fact, it was the opposite of that. What we did was, we didn't know what we wanted to build. We had an inkling of what might be possible with these technologies, but I don't think we had it in the shape, form, or in the way that it's finally manifested. What we did was, we said, well, let's not talk about the solution at all, because solution is going to, again, paint that blue color canvas already. So we wanted to absolutely avoid that, because having done that mistake in the past, and we said, we'll go to all these CISOs and CIOs out there in the wild, everybody in our network, everybody that we got introduced to, everybody that we had done business with in the past, everybody else who basically gave us audience. And we said, we will go and try to learn about their problems and keep it simple, because again, it cannot be a problem that is so wide and so complex that the conversations get lost, because you need some signal out of it, right? So keep it simple and ask them some simple questions, purely with the intention of learning. Say, hey, where's the demand, where's the white space, really, right? And so we would go and ask those questions, right? And we would go and ask them questions by saying, hey, if I give you a magic wand, this is quite literally the question I would ask a lot of the CISOs. So, hey, if I give you a magic wand, what is that one thing you would like to do with it? And then it would be interesting. That would elicit some interesting response. Most of them would come back by, I would like to solve this problem or that problem. Or, here's where the biggest puzzle is. Or, I don't even know if there's one thing. I've got 7 things that are broken, like stuff like that. Right. And so that would just help me learn and understand about what is priority for them. What are they really struggling with? Where is the gap? Why do they even need something, that potentially we are thinking of? And then I think you need to do this in small iterations and small cycles, and do it in very fast loops, kind of in accelerated small cycles, if you may. And at some point in time, once you have enough feedback, of course, that cycle needs to be with a prototype, right? So that prototype cycle, I would say, is maybe the 4th phase of the cycle or something, right? Or the 5th phase of the cycle. The first one is pure exploration, that, you fine tune that some more, gone to either the same audience or some newer audience, and, again, kind of checked back in terms of, hey, does this make sense? This is what I heard from you, right? This is what I think you're telling me. Is this what you're telling me, right? So kind of confirmation, if you may. So, I would almost, if I were to build a model, and I'm trying to build it as we speak, like, there's an exploration phase, and there's a confirmation phase, if you may. It's like, hey, I explored something. Does it sound right? And that's where the experimentation phase starts off. And the experimentation phase also is like 3 sub phases, where the first one is concept experimentation. You go back and say, hey, what if I solved it like this? You basically told a story, and see how the story is received, and if there's twinkling in the eyes after the story, well, you've story's got something, right? Now you're going to build out the characters and build a whole movie around it. But if nobody took the story, well, that it fell flat for whatever reason. The problem is for real, the solution isn't, right? And so then you iterate a bit more on your story, and that's where I think you start giving it a bit more, sort of add more meat to it, if you may, right? Where you start talking about, okay, here's a prototype, and that's when you can sign up a design partner, if you may. And it takes off, right? From there on, it's a journey where then you can start looking at an MVP, and you can start looking at tangible customers, and then, sort of growing the company out. So that process is very important. I feel that whole process of exploration, confirmation, experimentation is what really allows, I think, most interesting products to come out, really out of the customers, really out of the users, out of the, the community, out of the world out there, right? And so I think, like, that's something that I think innovation is like highly misunderstood. I think so. I felt, because I was like that too. If you asked me this question 2 decades back, I would have told you the reverse story. I would have said, "Hey, I need to hire two extremely creative people, and then we lock ourselves in a room in a mountain and brainstorm for 3 days, draw a ton on the whiteboard and come out with that aha moment." Right? Like I would have probably said that. Um, but I think over the years I learned that that's not the right way to do it, and I think the world has also learned it, right? Like, and that's where I think a lot of this user centric design, a lot of sort of early feedback becomes more and more real, right? And then last but not the least is, how do you do it in a way where it's interesting? And
Hmm.
I really mean it quite deliberately when I say that, is because the attention spans and the amount of energy that people have to give you is very small. And the reason for that is, in modern society, and I think all of us could empathize with it, there's just too much going on for each one of us. Professional and personal lives, there's just so much going on a daily basis that it's hard to, show the same level of energy to everything. And we end up disproportionately allocating energy to things that actually we find exciting, right? And exciting could, everybody has their various reasons to get excited. Some people get excited because of this newer possibility of technology. Some really get excited because there is some thing that we have been struggling with for a long period of times and now it's getting solved. And some people are just also very intrigued and excited because the story is compelling, it sounds interesting. We all like interesting things in life, right? It has an aura and appeal around it. So I would definitely encourage everyone to do that. We try to do that on a daily basis. Even today, we've come a little further along from when we were doing all of this actively a couple of years back. But even today, that's the piece that I think is most important. This is what really will allow us to kind of iterate and learn and grow and succeed, because we want people to be bought into this mission. And the way the buying into the mission is both ways. It doesn't mean that they all have to be believers, but even people who are skeptical about a certain technology are also excellent people to get involved, because they are still excited. In a way, they're curious, they want to challenge it, right? And sometimes you need them as well. In fact, not sometimes, you need them all the time, right? Because then you get both balanced perspectives, right? So that's what I would say. That's been my sort of learning and journey. And I would encourage everyone to go speak to the user today. Like, if you're thinking of building a company 3 months out, well, go speak to the user today.
I think it's. I mean, there's so much to take away here and unpack, and we're gonna have obviously have you back, and maybe even your own podcast at this stage, because holy crow, there is so much that you could shed on this. Like, you're a perfect guest for our audience, being able to break all of this down. And I know we've already run over time. I've already stolen more of your time than I said I would, but at this time, I still want to close off with a little bit more here with, looking ahead, right? And if you were for aspiring entrepreneurs, I'm sure you get this all the time. People, asking you for advice or asking you based on your experiences, what you've learned, what would you offer? So maybe key lessons regarding, building these disruptive, scalable companies, or, just advice that you would offer to a founder that's looking for a little bit more to kind of guide them on the right path.
Oh, thank you. Well, firstly, thanks again for your kind words. Very generous of you. I've also been having a lot of fun in this conversation, and surely we'll find time, to have more of this. Um, in terms of advice, firstly, I'm very glad to be of help in any and every way, because it's something that I also learned from others, right? And it's my moment to kind of give back in whatever small way that I can. Um, every entrepreneur that I come across, and I come across many, as you mentioned, for various reasons, my advice is usually divided into, two categories. First is around validation. So I always ask every entrepreneur to say, hey, if you're excited about something, spend a little energy validating it. And when I say validation, validate it at multiple levels. Validate whether you'll get enough people to go with you on that journey, right? You're on a quest to go climb a peak. Well, make sure you've got a team, right? Like, who's ready to go with you on that journey. Um, Go and validate where, of course, there is a market opportunity and you're solving a real problem, goes without saying, which will come out of, user conversations and customer conversations. And also, third thing is validate for yourself. Do you have the conviction? And what I mean by that is, a lot of us can get excited about a project. It's always fun to start a new project. I cannot imagine anybody in this world who wouldn't be excited about a new thing, or a new project or a new beginning. Um, because that's just, again, being very human. As humans, we like new beginnings, we like strong beginnings. The problem isn't this beginning. The problem is, the day 7 of the journey, or the day 25 of the journey, or the day 257 of the journey, right? Like, that's when you've got to ask this question one more time, is, hey, am I still enthused and excited, given that, I've had some wins, but I've also had all these scars that I've collected along, and things that I anticipated, but they're not really coming through. And so I think, like, the way I try to think about that and help people reason through is, like, validate that early on. Now, how will you validate that? Because it's a tough one. You haven't seen day 257. How do you know you'll be excited then or not?
Yeah.
But I think this is where you can step back as a person, because you know yourself best, right? And this is, I'm talking to anyone, a new entrepreneur who's wanting to embark on a journey. I'm saying, well, step back and think what's important for you. What do you value? Why do you value what you value? What does that patience and persistence and, just sort of grit and wanting to achieve certain pieces mean for you? How badly do you want it? Why do you want it? What are the motivators, right? And if the motivators are more superficial, like if the motivators are, hey, I want to become rich overnight, well, it's a tricky one. Think again, because there's a very high probability you're not going to become rich overnight. So, if you
Right.
just think of it mathematically, well, you're embarking on something that you already know at starting point that your chance is very low. Maybe do something else if that's the goal. There are other ways of achieving it. So, maybe pursue those, right? Because there are higher probabilities there. But if the goal is, I want to go on this mission because, I want to accomplish it for myself, I want to learn and make this happen, well, then it's a slightly different motivation. But there again, you have to figure out, is it momentarily, is it something that you'll stick with for the longer period of time, right? So definitely validate, right? At large, validate all of these. Validate whether you've got a team, people, other people believing in you and your idea. Validate that the idea's got legs, and validate in your own conviction, right? So, like, that is very important, first part. And then the second part is, break that big puzzle, the big goal you have, into something that is more tangible for here and now, right? And this is, again, nothing new. I think most people talk about it. It's important to have the big vision, by the way. If you don't have the big vision, you'll get lost, right? Like, that's just how it is, right? It's, again, taking the analogy of mountain climbing. If you don't know you have to go summit the peak, you could be walking in the wilderness for your life,
Yep.
right? So you got to have a vision, right? Like, hey, that's the peak. The peak is the goal. I got to get there, right? But having said that, your target has to be the next base camp. You can't be over worrying about the peak, because if you over worry about the peak, you'll tire yourself out, right? You've got multiple base camps to go through before you can even think about the peak. You don't see it. It's far away. It's up there in the clouds, right? And so if you go base camp by base camp saying, well, I need to reach to this base camp in this time, and then, of course, use some standard things. I'm a big believer of two concepts of acceleration and momentum. I just love those. The faster you try to go towards the next base camp, the sooner you will learn whether you're ready to go to the further base camps, upstream or not, right? And so I think, like, that becomes one of the good validation points. And if you pick momentum, if you do your first couple of base camps quickly, well, then it allows you to scale the more treacherous ones with more confidence, because now you build some momentum, some confidence, right? Your team is also enthused, there's positive energy to kind of come along with you. So I feel like, that's the key part that you've got to build around. Validation on one front, and the second front is, take that big vision, be excited about it, but break it down into more, here and now. What is it that I want to target, by when, and go fast at it with the full conviction.
That is, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. That is just absolutely wonderful advice. I love that analogy too. I mean, honestly, I think probably climbing Mount Everest is easier than starting a successful company with the way that it goes and the amount of risk and the amount of beatings you take and everything else. But it just everything from the preparation, the training, the goal setting, the vision. Like, I mean, it's all such a great analogy. It builds it all together there. So I think that is an unbelievable place to wrap this episode up. I don't think that as you said, I don't think that we're done. We're going to have a lot more to talk about here, but for this episode, before we go, Shashank, I want to just have you invite our audience, how to get in contact with you, a little bit more maybe about you, Uno.ai as well, just to really kind of tie it all together, because I know our listeners are probably already, scratching to get more from you and be able to connect with you. So how are they able to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thanks again for having me on the show, Ryan, and definitely we'll find time to chat more. I've enjoyed this and loved this as much. The best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. I think I'm most active there, although I do have a Twitter account, but I rarely tweet, so I don't think you'll see me actively sort of responding there. So you can find with my full name, Shashank Tiwari. You can just go search that up, or T Shanky. That's the handle that is out there, I think, on LinkedIn as well. So you can find me there, send me a note, connect with me, ask me questions. I'm very happy to be of help if I can. You can also find me via my company's website, which is uno.ai. That's a short, easy to remember, uno.ai. So you can find more about us there. And thanks again, for the opportunity to tell not only our story, but what we have accomplished with Uno AI. So we're about a 2-year-old company. We started fall of 2021. We are original creators of this idea of a co-pilot, right? And we, of course, focused at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. And, it's essentially a cybersecurity co-pilot. And what this really does is it's a force multiplier, right? Like every cybersecurity team is struggling to up their skill gap and do more things with less. This is what, makes that happen. Right. And of course, if you go on the website, you would be able to dig in and learn a bit more about all the interesting, cool things we are trying to bring together, right, with generative AI and knowledge graphs, along with, of course, combining that with a lot of the cyber defense and offense strategies that come into play.
Incredible. That is a great, definitely reach out and check out uno.ai as well to get more information. And just, Shashank, thank you again so much for being here. So our final minute to thank Shashank Tiwari for this amazing podcast, truly amazing podcast episode, Bold Innovation, Building Disruptive Tech Companies. Thank you again for being here. I'm indebted to you, and I know our audience is absolutely going to love and continue to probably re-listen to this episode as well. So thank you again for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Excellent. And of course, to our listeners, another genuine thank you. We can't do what we do without you. So until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I'm your host, Ryan Davies. Thanks everybody for listening, and take care.
Thank you, Ryan, for this amazing episode. Thank you for joining us on the Tech Business Roundtable podcast. We hope our discussions have sparked new ideas, expanded your knowledge, and empowered you on your entrepreneurial journey. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and write us a positive review. Thank you for listening to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show.